It's like you're having fun on your bike, but instead of fun, you're going while wearing just enough lycra to not be naked. I'm Mike Levy. This is The Explainer. Today, we're talking cross-country racing. So, unlike downhill racing, which is obviously all downhill, and enduro racing, which is all enduro, cross-country racing takes place on courses that both climb and descend. And because of that, fitness is usually the deciding factor. And the bikes, they can be really light and really efficient. You'll still see hardtails in cross-country racing, but mostly short travel, full suspension bikes. Cross-country racing is also the only type of mountain biking that's in the Olympics. But first, we're gonna go way back to 1868, which is when the French are said to have invented bicycle racing, which is where Tour de France came from. That last fact isn't true, I just made that one up. But back then, they were doing those races on those penny farthing things with the huge front wheel and the tiny rear wheel. And apparently, according to the internet, that's where the term breakneck speed came from. People were flipping over the handlebars on those things and breaking their necks when they went over 3 miles an hour. Not good. So in the decades following, something called track racing, where racers would race around in circles on these giant wooden tracks, we call them velodromes now, as well as road racing, became hugely popular both in Europe and in North America. Racing bicycles off-road has been around for something like 3/4 of a century before the mountain bike was even invented. I'm talking about cyclocross, of course, which is a whole nother level of kookiness and pain. It's basically done on a road bike with slightly less deathy tires, in a grassy field, always in the rain, and if you're watching it, I think you're supposed to be drunk. We're gonna go all the way back to 1976 and a little over 12,000 feet up to a place called Pearl Pass in Colorado. So this was back in the 60s and 70s, and people were modifying their beach cruisers to make them more capable off-road. So in 1976, a handful of guys and a few gals rode theirs from Crested Buddy to rode theirs from their homes in Crested Butte to Aspen, Colorado, 39 miles away, up and over that 12,000 foot Pearl Pass. So it wasn't a race per se, but what happens when you get a bunch of pedal heads together like that? Well, we're idiots. There was no start list and no timing, but that race, the Pearl Pass Tour, has happened nearly every year since. Side note, 1976 was also the year of the first downhill race. It was called the repack because racers had to repack their coaster brake hubs at the bottom of each run. The grease inside it would literally burn away. Back to cross-country racing. So that's how it all started, but nowadays we have all sorts of different kinds of cross-country racing. Now, if you ask me, there's only one kind, the kind that's painful, which is all of them. But we're gonna talk about World Cup cross-country racing first. Modern World Cup cross-country racing is a fast, condensed, TV-friendly version of how the first series went down back in 1989. Now, the UCI World Cup series back then used long and arduous courses that put the mountain in mountain biking. Trouble was, it's hard to get the cameras way out there when the riders are way out in the boonies. Nowadays, cameras can cover pretty much an entire World Cup cross-country course. Now the courses, they're much smaller and shorter in duration. Races take about an hour and a half, and they're doing a whole lot of laps instead of one huge monster loop. Now, courses can also be quite tactical nowadays, especially when you consider that you're gonna be breathing through your eyeballs while trying to pass people or not let people pass you. So short track racing, think of it as sort of qualifying for the big race on Sunday. The better you do in short track, the closer to the front of the field you can start on Sunday's big race. Races last around 20 minutes, and because they're so short, they're basically just balls out efforts. Now, because of this, most racers would tell you that short track racing is one of the most painful ways to do it. So there's also something called World Cup Eliminator that takes place on the same weekends. Now, do you guys remember 4-cross? Think 4-cross, except cross-country racing. It's 4 racers at a time. First one to the bottom wins. Races are about 1.5 to 2 minutes long, and the courses, they're actually kind of technical, and the races reward power and taking chances. There's also marathon racing, which is actually a lot like the early days of cross-country racing. Some of the courses can be even over 100 miles, and they're always very challenging. Think a lot of climbing, a lot of descending, and pretty technical. There's also something called stage racing, which is a lot like normal cross-country racing, except it's a bunch of days in a row. It could just be 2 days, or it could be a week. Now, because the races are so long,
strategy is a big factor. Racers also have to pace themselves with many days of back-to-back competition in mind. All this talk of cross-country racing is making me tired. I need more energy.
Why is it lumpy?
There's also 24-hour racing, which again, you're racing cross-country for 24 hours. Now, you don't have to go non-stop unless you want to win. The winners are the ones that cover the most ground. There are 6-hour version and 12-hour versions as well too, but a lot of these, they end up being more party than race. People just want to ride their bike and have fun, even if it is for a long time. So, how do you know you're looking at a cross-country race bike? Well, I can tell because my heart rate automatically skyrockets in anticipation of getting thrown over the handlebar. But here are a few other ways. Number one, cross-country race bikes have way less suspension. So if the fork doesn't look like it's long enough, it's probably on the front of a cross-country race bike. Number two, cross-country race bikes usually have scary looking tires on them. Now, old cross-country race bikes had pizza cutter tires that were sometimes not even 2 inches wide. That's not the case anymore. Modern race bikes are using some pretty high volume tires, but the knobs are so low on them that they look like a minion that's been on the back of a bike that spent an entire summer in the Whistler bike park. The other issue is that race tires need to roll fast, and your minions, they're tractor tires. Number three, the seat is really high and it probably doesn't go down. Dropper posts are heavier than upper post, and there's your answer. Cross-country bikes, they have to be light. Now that's not always true. On more technical courses, we're seeing some racers use dropper posts, but even then, it's usually just a short travel version. Number four, it's probably really easy to pick up. A top-of-the-line cross-country race hardtail is going to be well under 20 pounds, and a full suspension bike may only weigh a pound or two more. Remember, less weight takes less energy and you go uphill faster. All right, so one last thing to note about the bikes is that they used to be scary as hell, but modern cross-country race bikes don't have to be. They're still super light, but modern geometry and components that are super light but not useless or scary has made them more capable and versatile than ever. All right, next up, how do you know you're looking at a cross-country racer? Well, there's a good chance they don't weigh much. You don't need to be skinny, but it sure helps. Cross-country racing is all about power to weight ratio, and they don't eat many donuts. I wish I had a donut right now. Ask them about something called their FTP. If they start listing off a bunch of numbers and telling you about their unflavored pasta they had for dinner, well, there's a good chance that you're talking to a cross-country racer. Number three, smooth skin. God, don't look at me! All you need to do is sneak up behind a cross-country racer and run your finger up one of their calves. If it's smooth, you're probably talking to a cross-country racer. You can't actually go do that. You can't actually go feel people. I probably have to put this f***ing disclaimer in there. But despite what they'll tell you, the only reason they shave their legs is because it feels good. It does. Smooth. Number four, they're probably wearing enough lycra to look like a Power Ranger, but not nearly as cool. So baggy clothing, all it does is flap in the wind while making you look good. Why do that when you could be a teeny tiny bit faster while not looking good? Seriously though, lycra is all about function and going fast, and that's what racing is about. So that's why they wear tight clothing. All right, so that is cross-country racing explained. Obviously, it is a ton of fun. Let us know in the comments below when and where your next cross-country race is going to be. That's something a dad would say, like, someone's dad would be like, "You pedalheads." So it wasn't a race per se.